Hello, I am here today to convince you that the decorative elements of the Christian Gothic churches enhanced their architecture in many ways. They improved the spatial, experiential, functional, and cultural aspects of the structures which they adorned. The higher vaults and thinner structural elements of Gothic cathedrals allowed more natural light in the interior, and the patterned, colourful nature of this light through stained glass windows provided a more impressive appearance. The elaborate ornamentation in the form of statues, tracery, crockets and pinnacles further augmented this impression. Overall, these features allowed a more heavenly experience for visitors of the church, which contributed functionally to the cathedral by providing more inspiration for worshippers and more status for the city in which the cathedral was located. The archetypal structural elements of Gothic cathedrals were the ribbed vaults, pointed arches and flying buttresses, as seen here. These structural members allowed less wall surface area to consist of masonry and allowed more wall surface area to consist of glass. These features, however, were only structural elements to allow the display of the decorative elements which we are now discussing today. The sight of towering vaults encased in plain glass alone would have been impressive by themselves, following the solid, heavy Romanesque churches you can see here on the left. However, the addition of beautiful stained glass windows of various colours and patterns enhanced the internal appearance of cathedrals markedly by creating more impressive light patterns in the interior. This contributed to the goal of creating a heavenly experience on earth, as envisioned by Abbot Sugar, the godfather of Gothic architecture. The impression of experiencing this slice of heaven on earth serves as a lesson to the early Christians worshipping in Gothic cathedrals and inspired them towards the faith, and therefore the decorative elements were enhancing this religious function of the cathedral. The decorative elements of Gothic cathedrals had a cultural and political significance which was not only theological or religious. The cathedral was often not only considered as a place of worship, but also as a jewel in the crown of fledgling European cities, and it became a symbol of a city's prosperity. The construction of the cathedrals was funded by rich patrons and was made exclusively to order by artisans and masons. Everything that the artists who decorated the cathedrals did had a purpose as determined by the patrons, rather than the independent comment and expression that artists strive towards today. Therefore, the stained glass windows and ornamentation in the cathedral often included figures of royalty and nobility, broadcasting their influence to the world. The ornamentation and decoration enhanced these non-theological cultural functions of the cathedrals. Apart from the stained glass windows, the statues, pinnacles, crockets, and elaborate tracery seen on Gothic cathedrals also contributed to their grand appearance and enhanced the architecture of their respective buildings. Some of these features had a structural contribution also. For example, the pinnacles found on the piers of the flying buttresses were originally thought to be purely decorative, but they had the structural function of serving as a counterweight to the force of the mass of the main cathedral nave, therefore allowing the walls of the nave to be built higher. The more elaborate and delicate these decorative features were in a particular cathedral, the more mature this cathedral was in the context of the development of the Gothic movement. The ornate and elaborate nature of the pinnacles, crockets, statues, gargoyles and tracery seen on the cathedrals indicates to us the sheer skill, time, persistence and expense needed to sculpt them. These features impress the viewer and further enhance the otherworldliness and heavenliness of the final structure, compared to structures with less or completely no ornamentation. For example, contrast the interesting but bland interior of the monastery of Santa Maria de la Huerta in Spain with the stunning interior of the Sainte-Chapelle Cathedral in Paris. Or contrast the interior of Landgrave's Castle in Marburg, Germany with the interior of Westminster Abbey. Is the west front of Reims Cathedral built during the High Gothic period? not more inspiring than the relatively bland west front of the Chartres Cathedral built during the early Gothic period. However, the essence of the contribution of the artistic and decorative elements of Gothic cathedrals is difficult to express in words, and these features possessed an intricacy and beauty that reflected the intense faith and religion of the age in which they were constructed. To summarise, with the decorative elements, Gothic cathedrals are breathtaking and are things of great beauty. Without them, they would be plain.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen and fellow peers. I would like to acknowledge the Whadjuk Noongar people, traditional custodians of the land on which Curtin University's Bentley campus sits, and pay my respects to the elders, both past and present. Today I will be arguing position B, that the decorative elements of Christian Gothic churches, statues, stained glass windows, etc., were irrelevant to and even distracted from the architecture of their respective buildings. The architectural form of Gothic churches was very exuberant and lavish, with pointed arches, ribbed vaults, and flying buttresses. It did not need further embellishments with stained glass and sculptures. This artistry pulled the focus of the architectural feats of reaching new heights and slimming vertical structures. The decorative features are comparable to interior design accessories, such as how a Barcelona or a Wassily chair complements modernism, or a William Morris wallpaper beautifies the arts and craft movement. It adds to the overall impression of the building and the Gothic theme, yet the decorative features are an entirely separate entity to the architecture. Modernism demonstrates and supports the notion of how irrelevant ornamentation and decoration is, placing the focus on structure and functionality. The stained glass and sculptures can be aligned with modern-day advertising, a means to control and reinforce the scriptures to the illiterate masses. It did not highlight the architecture. The exuberant costs actually went against the wishes of civilians and the history of Christianity, highlighting a rift between the East and West churches. Christian Gothic churches did not need statues or stained glass windows to create heaven on earth, as the Gothic architectural style was highly decorative. The majestic structures reached up to the heavens, attaining new heights with thinness and delicacy. There were two phases in Gothic architecture. The initial phase focused on structure and height of the building, and the second, Rayonnette, focused on decoration and visual effect. Before the end of the era, the decoration was no longer a part of the structure. In England, they used the structurally superfluous mouldings and clusters of extra shafts to lighten the appearance of Romanesque buildings, which highlights how irrelevant the decoration is to the structure of the architecture. The architectural form alone achieved what Sugar, the founder of the style, had set out to do. He wanted to transport the worshipper to an intermediate realm between heaven and earth. The form of the architecture conveys the meaning of the building. Ornament is not essential to architecture. Botticher, Semper and Rimmer proposed the idea that the form of a building and its construction materials generated the primary symbolic image, and that the art form is secondary. Botticher refers to the decoration as the structurally unnecessary decorative dressing of the kern. Rimmer proposed it is the entirety of a building and its form that constitutes beauty, and that an object cannot be made beautiful by the addition of another additive element. Adolf Loos in The Luxury Vehicle, 1898, sums it up perfectly. To find beauty in form instead of making it dependent on ornament is the goal towards which humanity is aspiring. The ideas of modernism highlights how irrelevant the decoration of the Gothic church is to the architectural form and function of the building. The modern movement gathered momentum with Bauhaus beliefs such as form follows function. This instigated the clean lines, asymmetrical composition, and no ornamentation. The quote by Louis Sullivan in Ornament in Architecture sums up the view that decoration, regardless of the era, is irrelevant and distracts from the architecture. I take it as self-evident that a building quite devoid of ornament may convey a noble and dignified sentiment by virtue of mass and proportion. It is not evident to me that ornament can intrinsically heighten these elemental qualities. Why then should we use ornament? Is it not simply dignity sufficient? Why should we ask more? The use of decorative stained glass and sculptures in Gothic architecture can be seen to be interior decoration, advertising, not architectural form. The stained glass of the Middle Ages was pictorial art and a way to tell the scriptures to the illiterate masses. The stain on the glass was about controlling the light, not about letting people see out or to let light in, and for this reason stained glass windows have been described as illuminated wall decorations. Consider them an LED signbox. Today, backlit posters of movies line cinemas' walls, advertising new films. These decorative LED boxes and dark paint in cinemas distract from the architecture of the building, the same way that the interior design of Gothic churches and the coloured light coming through the abbey's windows would have mystified, allured and captured the attention of the illiterate masses. They would not have noticed the vaulted ceiling or the architecture, but the interior decoration. Stained glass was interior decoration. It was not a part of the architecture, therefore irrelevant and distracting. When analysing Lex Dominicanum, we marvel at the Gothic architecture. There is no decorative stained glass or 3D sculptures, yet the beauty of the architecture permeates the modern fitting. The sleek modern black shelves contrast the high vaulted ceilings, amplifying the beauty of the architecture, even more so than the decorations of the Gothic era. The architectural form is still identifiable as Gothic architecture, making the decoration of stained glass windows and sculptures irrelevant. The great iconoclastic controversy also points out the irrelevance of the lavish decorations of the Gothic churches. Christianity wasn't lavish. It's humble. Gatherings used to be in hiding, risking persecution. Christians' main purpose was to spread the word of the Lord, and they mostly lived in poverty, hence them being illiterate. Abbot Sugar was highly criticised for the exuberant costs of the Abbey of St. Denis, which he went against Christian beliefs. For over 300 years there was a division between the iconoclasts, who were in favour of the use of images in church buildings, and the iconoclasts, who were against the use of images. The irrelevance or offence of decoration in Gothic churches depends on whether you are Catholic or Orthodox. The stained glass windows are majestical, and the sculptures display talent, skill, and are captivating pieces of art. However artful or beautiful they are, the cost was too exuberant and are irrelevant to the architectural form and function. Without these decorations, we can still identify Gothic architecture, deeming them irrelevant. The stained glass windows and sculptures are interior decoration. They create the mood and atmosphere, but they are not architectural. Gothic architecture is a symbol, signifying the beauty and glory of God, reaching new heights with ribbed vaults, flying buttresses, and pointed arches.
Thanks, Carmel. You've shown us that theoretically there should be no difference between architecture that has ornamentation compared to architecture that has no ornamentation. However, this ignores the fact that emotional engagement comes into the issue of enhancing or contributing to architecture, but full marks for the rational analysis. I don't believe that modernism theories justify that beautiful Gothic masterpieces are about the same architecturally as Adolf Loos's minimalist eyesores. The amount of emotional engagement that Adolf Loos's boring stone blocks inspired is almost non-existent compared to the elaborate grand Gothic cathedrals. It is hard to measure emotional engagement with architecture objectively, but the number of people that visit buildings can perhaps be used as a proxy figure for this. Consider Notre Dame Cathedral, which gets 13 million visitors every year, or Westminster Abbey, which receives merely 1 to 2 million visitors each year. And the number of visitors to Adolf Loos's constructions? To be honest, I couldn't find any information on this, probably because no one wants to visit his monstrosities. Even the pièce de la résistance of modernist architecture, Le Corbusier's Villa Savoy, only has about 20,000 visitors per year. So to conclude, the decorative elements which promote emotional engagement in the architecture of Gothic churches definitely contribute and enhance the architecture of their respective buildings. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Marty. I agree with you that the stained glass and sculptures enhance the interior space, but as you mentioned, clear glass to the exterior wouldn't change the overall impression, structure or form of the building, and as Adolf Loos points out, that it is the proportion, shape and form of a building that conveys meaning. Interior decoration is an additive element, changeable to suit the function of the space. Architecture is visual vocabulary. The shape and form of Gothic architecture, reaching towards heaven with its pointed arches, flying buttresses and ribbed vaults, is the visual vocabulary. Your point about who wants to go and see a modernist eyesore? I do, and I'm sure there is plenty of other people and students who are intrigued with the history of architecture. Although you dismiss modernism with your personal preference, it has and still does influence modern buildings and even residential homes. To quote your own words, the essential structure elements of Gothic cathedrals were the ribbed vaults, pointed arches, and flying buttresses. You then go on to highlight the distinction between the decorative features are separate to the structural assets, and that the architecture was constructed purely for the display of decoration. Here you are diminishing the work of the architect and placing the importance of interior design. The interior decoration can be designed and chosen to stipulate whatever the purpose of the room may be, a cafe, a bookshop, a church, but it does not alter the architecture. You referred to the pinnacle as decorative elements, yet as they are structural, they are architectural. Be they visually ornamental or not, they are now not decorative but functional. Marty, you highlighted your preference of interior design styles. Our opinions shall differ greatly, yet architecturally I hope you would agree that all these buildings are majestic and inspiring for the era they were built. Let the interior designers and artists beautify the interior to the specification of the client, and let the form and structure be the architecture.